Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to Mary Elizabeth Winstead all about her movie, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. And in starting off and talking about the way that this has been completely reimagined by Michelle Garza Vergara, the director of the film, I thought it was so interesting that you have, these kind of genre thriller elements, but actually there's so many themes and topics to do with motherhood and trauma within it. And I was interested in just the idea that that gave you for how to play Caitlin as a character with all of that in mind, that's kind of bubbling underneath as this conversation and discussion throughout the film.
Absolutely. I think that's really kind of what pulled me to want to do the movie. First of all, it was just such a well-crafted script in every way, and the genre element of it worked so well, and it was like such a page turner. But ultimately, the empathy that it had for the characters was what really struck me, for both of these women. It's not at all like just a classic sort of cat fight kind of thing. It's really these two very wounded people, very flawed people, coming at their lives from these very different angles, and you kind of see how that comes to a head in the film. And it's very, very sad ultimately. I think there's a lot of sadness in it, in between the horror and the chills and the tingles up your spine. You also really feel for these people, and I think that that's sometimes very unusual, in genre movies or in anything. Any time when you can really connect to characters, I think that's a really special thing.
No, it's such a great point, and there's so many aspects with your character where she's kind of very self-aware that she's trying to keep everything very tightly bound around
Mhm.
her, and there's a lot of reason behind that that we learn and uncover later in the film. How did that idea of just trying to control the uncontrollable around her with her own life and with the way that she parents her kids conform a lot of that for you?
I mean, I loved that. I loved that she is this kind of, she's one person at her core, and then she's kind of got all these layers that she's built on top of that to kind of create someone who seems a bit more perfect and put together, and she's trying to present herself a certain way. And as an actor, that's so much fun, to have a person who is kind of actually their real self is kind of inside this shell, and you get to build that shell, and you get to also find that kind of person underneath. And so that's so juicy and so fun to play with. And I absolutely love anytime I get to find a role like that. So yeah, I loved every minute of it.
And we also learned that following the birth of her older child, that, she went through some form of probably postpartum depression, and like how that psychologically affected her in so many ways. And, it feels like a lot of that comes into play in terms of the relationship with her husband. And I was curious about how you and Raul Castillo wanted to kind of really form that with the idea of the way that he tries to listen and support her at certain moments, but doesn't necessarily always know or feel like he has the right tools to truly understand or do the right thing by her.
Yeah, I think again, even, with that character, there's a lot of empathy in there too. On the one hand, you know, um, he could seem like the sort of classic husband character who's just sort of like not getting it. But I think in the film, you see him really trying. He's really trying to understand, but ultimately fundamentally feels like he just can't. Like he's on the outside of something that he can't experience and he can't ever really know. And that's something that leads to so much kind of tension and frustration between them, because, of course, you always want your partner to understand you, because that's the person who's closest to you. But sometimes, they can't know what you're going through. They can't know that experience on an intimate level. And that's kind of a very lonely place, I think, for a woman who's been through that or going through that. It can be really difficult to feel like your partner is fully on the same page, because how can you explain exactly what it is that you're going through?
Yeah.
So I think that is kind of a very relatable thing. And I think there is so much love between them. And it's so great. The movie, I think, really captures that the sort of there is a lot of love there, even though they're sort of going through this very kind of muddy, confusing thing as well.
Definitely. And it really kind of shines through in the way that the two of you have played it. And, it's always been the two of them parenting their kids together. And so with Micah Monroe's character, Polly, coming into the mix as a caregiver, it's also that really interesting, intimate dynamic of someone in the home taking care of your children and you're kind of co-parenting in a way. And everybody's trying to
Hmm.
figure out what should this relationship look like? What feels like our boundaries with each other because it's someone in your home as well. And they're kind of part of the family. And so how did you and Micah want to explore that dynamic of their relationship as they're trying to figure each other out?
Yeah, no, it was so interesting kind of finding that together because, there is this kind of instant connection between them. And I think, Caitlin's kind of not really sure what that connection is, but she sort of feels like she can trust this person or she feels connected to them in some way. And obviously, Polly's motives are complicated and, not so straightforward and not totally clear to Caitlin from the beginning. But it was fun to kind of play with those layers of there's a connection there, but we're figuring out what that is and, what's true and what's kind of, layered on top of the truth. And all of that was so complicated and fun and rare to get to kind of play in that way with another actress. So I loved it.
And especially because the things that Polly starts doing that are untoward within their home are things that could be innocuous to someone else, but really
Yeah.
push Caitlin's buttons. The idea of
Yes.
you gave my baby formula is something that's such the antithesis of the type of mom and parent that she wants to be to her kids and how she wants to raise
Yes.
them. And how did that really play into a lot of things of just the psychological element of this is something really important to me and you absolutely knew this, so you know what you're doing.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's so tricky. And like you said, that the boundaries were a key thing because I think, this is the first time they've brought someone into their house to help them with their kids. And so I think Caitlin's really she's kind of a people pleaser in a way. And I think she wants very much for Caitlin to be happy and to feel like she's giving Caitlin or sorry, wants Polly to be happy and she wants Polly to feel like she's having a good experience in their home. And she wants to kind of present that, we're this perfect family and we're going to give you a great experience and you don't have to worry about anything. And, yeah, here's some ground rules for what I want for my baby, but also we're kind of like friends. And I think, it wasn't really clear on all the kind of boundaries that needed to be laid. And that kind of opens the door for Polly to play around with her emotions a little bit. Because Caitlin feels like she's laying down the law, but at the same time, she's afraid of sort of fracturing this relationship that's being built between them as well, because she wants her to be a nanny to her children, but she also wants her to be a friend and, all of these things. And so it becomes very complicated right from the beginning. That's a really complicated, enmeshed place that, things are going to get messy. And I don't think you can ever imagine it would get as messy as it gets in this film. But that still is kind of ripe for a lot, of complicated things to happen.
It is, and the complication between them is so layered because, as a filmmaker, Michelle's also talked about how she wanted the audience to feel like maybe there's a possibility that they're attracted to each other, one of
Yes.
them or both of them. And
Yeah.
for your interpretation of the character, how did you want to play that, or how did that feed into some of the scenes for you?
Yeah, I think right off the bat, there's just kind of an intimacy that Caitlin feels with Polly, and also I think it's something that she doesn't have with a lot of people because she's not fully been her authentic self for so long. So I think it's really hard to get close to people when you're covering up who you really are. And something about Polly was like she felt like, oh, I feel like she sees me in some way and there's an intimacy there and she doesn't know what it is. So it was really fun to kind of play with, okay, what is this? Is she a friend? Or maybe this is attraction, like maybe this is some feeling coming up in me that I don't understand but I need to explore. And so that kind of confusion within Caitlin was really fun to play, and someone who even at this point in their lives is discovering some like new emotion within themselves, is really cool. It's cool to play somebody who's going through all of that internally.
And even just the fact that you can have a singular scene that plays to all of those different questions at the same time. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about scene where Polly offers to help with like one of the muscles on her neck. And,
Hmm.
it's that kind of plays into the idea of, is there some sort of attraction? It's also,
Yeah.
the kind of caregiving to each other. And then there's also the element of her hand is physically on her neck. So there's a danger
Yes.
to it as well. And
Totally.
how did you want lots of scenes to kind of have multiple different reasonings, interpretations, and
Hmm.
feelings like that?
I know it's so wonderfully layered and complex, and that's what's, so great about it. Yeah, I think the main thing was that we were also on the same page about all of those things. We all, Micah and Michelle and myself, we kind of met up, beforehand and talked about some of those key scenes, and it was clear that we were all like, from a sort of just perspective of the whole film, we just kind of got it. We just kind of got what this needed to be and what we were trying to do and trying to say. So really nothing about it felt hard in that way because it was so clear, like what these characters have gone through, what they're going through, and also stylistically what the film is trying to convey. So it was so fun just to like dive in and be like, we got this. We know what we're doing. Let's just like have fun and do it. It was just the best.
I love that. And there's also so much in your performance of just the way that you kind of level up the emotional response to everything throughout the film. And, the idea of the less that I'm heard and believed, the more
Mm,
erratic the emotions start to feel.
yes.
How did you kind of approach that side of things of really thinking about which level you wanted to take it to at different pinpoints and different stages?
Yeah. Well, I felt like that was very kind of an astute thing, like having her be kind of triggered by not being believed because, as we sort of learn in the film without giving too much away, but that is something that's a core part of her story, is not being believed. And so um, when that starts happening, there's so much that starts coming up for her from that and taking her to a very kind of heightened place. And on top of that, having her past mental health struggles sort of used against her, to further make her like less reliable of a person. It was also so triggering. And so all of those things felt very just like true and real and relatable. And to be able to kind of bring that to this genre and take it all the way to the 10th degree was just great, and I felt just really lucky to be able to do that.
And you have the added aspect as well that, she's taking medication and she's unaware
Yeah.
that her medication is being tampered with. And
Yes.
that has neurological repercussions for her as well. How did that feed into everything?
That, those kinds of things can be tricky because you're shooting a bit out of sequence. Luckily, this was we were mostly in order, but not always. So there were definitely times when we'd be doing scenes and I'd have to like go to Michelle and be like, okay, like what has actually, where are we at this point? How long has she been taking medication that is different than, the medication she was on before? How's that affecting her? Those were things that I would sort of need to check in with Michelle about, and sometimes we'd get script supervisor over and we'd be like just tracking it, be like, okay, where are we at this point, what how heightened should we be, but that was just so fun. It was just such a collaborative process in that way, and I love that.
And there's also such an external look and feel to the character as she's starting to feel like she's falling apart and she's so
Yeah.
uncertain of everything. You kind of start with very tight up hairdos. Everything's
Yeah.
very structured in terms of the lines of the clothing. And then it's, I'm basically wearing sweatpants and my hair's not been brushed in
Yes.
3 days because of how I'm feeling. How did that
Yeah.
really help you to just calibrate the emotional side along with the external aspects?
It was so great. And I think it was one of those things that I was also just really excited about from a creative standpoint of just knowing kind of what Michelle's ideas about it were, because I just thought it was so cool the way that she mirrored Polly and Caitlin, and how they sort of start, paralleling each other in a way. And as Caitlin is breaking down and her look is breaking down, she's starting to look more like Polly at the beginning of the film, and Polly is starting to look more like Caitlin at the beginning of the film. And I thought that was done with such kind of subtlety, but it's also kind of clear, and just one of those things where from an outside perspective, it's like you're obviously when you're in the scenes, you're just going through it and you're just in it. But then you have these moments where you're stepping outside and you're just like, oh, that's so cool. It's just this is being so, well executed, and it's so much fun.
Because also in the way that she's directed scenes, the physical blocking of the scenes completely changes with the group dynamic. It starts
Mm,
that Polly is the outsider coming into this family, and then
yeah.
we start to have these scenes where your character Caitlin walks into the room and everybody's already sitting there, and she kind of
Yes.
pulls herself further backwards because she emotionally doesn't feel as connected in the moment. And
Mhm.
how did the blocking really inform decisions for you as well?
Oof.
Much.
Yes, there were so many moments where it would just hit me in a scene, where it's like it's one thing to read it, and then when you go in to do it, and it was just like, I realized, at some point towards the end of shooting, like how little I actually got to hold my baby in film, and how so much more often it was Polly holding my baby, and just like it just like hit me so much, like there's this kind of this almost struggle to connect with her children, which is part of Caitlin's struggle in a way, that she's trying to sort of be the perfect mom, and like is somehow keeps sort of falling short or just misstepping, and then Polly coming in and being this sort of natural with her kids and holding her baby and everything coming naturally, and Caitlin sort of suddenly feeling on the outside of that is like so painful. So yeah, it was so beautifully done, the way that we'd sort of walk into the scene and it would just naturally fall that way, and it would just be like, oh my gosh, this is just like a knife to the gut, like having to stand outside of this. It was, yeah, it was painful, but in the best way, because it just felt so like true and real, to the scenario.
Because she's also wanting to be so protective of her children as a parent, but also because, as we learn later, she wasn't protected in her own life. And what was that relationship that you really saw with her younger self and her inner child that she's trying to protect just as much as her own kids?
Yeah, I think that's what really starts coming out throughout the film, as she sort of starts just like screaming out, like, somebody like listen to me and believe me and, see me. And, I think she's for so long is kind of covered, just tried to cover all of that up and cover everything up that she'd been through. And this is sort of just exploding it all out. Like she's just like finally just like letting out her demons and who she really is. And by the end of the film, like seeing her, oh gosh, I don't know what am I supposed to, can I say like spoilers in this? I don't know.
We've called spoilers, so I think we're good now.
We're good. Okay.
Yeah.
But seeing her in this very battered state, I mean, that was something I loved about reading the ending, was like, oh, she now looks like how she has felt inside. It's just like completely just like this monstrous person, and that's kind of how what she's been trying to cover up, like, everything that she's been through and all the reality of kind of her life. And it's just kind of like, okay, this is me now. And there's like a relief in that somehow, where she's just like, I'm battered and bruised and bloody and I'm a mess, but like at least it's true. And I thought that was just, I've always just loved that about the ending.
It's such a great point. And, because we're jumping into spoiler territory now, I also wanted to talk about the altercation that you and Micah have together, where
Yeah.
they're in the middle of a fight. And then it's the fact that her husband and her daughter are watching, and her daughter accidentally gets hit as her husband's trying to pull them off of each other. And I wanted to ask about the choreography of that scene, because it's also not just about the choreography, it's the emotion and the level of feeling that goes into it in that moment for Caitlin.
Yes, that was so intense. But, again, it was just like, in a way, when at that point being so kind of steeped in the character, and also being able to relate so much, or just at least have so much empathy, for her, because I can imagine how unbelievably hard it would be to sort of be like losing your children essentially at this point, whether it's actually physically losing them or emotionally losing them to someone else who's kind of coming in and taking over, and kind of just being in that place of just like how crazy making that would be, on top of all the other things that, that have happened in the film. Um, so it was sort of easy to kind of tap into that emotion, and then actually, seeing the aftermath of like, oh, I've just accidentally, but still, I've hit one of my children because of the state that I'm in. Just how gut wrenching that would be. It was all very sort of easy to play in a way because it just felt so kind of real um, and very, very easy to imagine how painful that would be. And everyone was so talented and so great at making it feel real that it was just great to just step in there, in that kind of heightened emotional state and just sort of let it all out.
And following that, you have a scene that you have to almost play very differently because she's now no longer living in her home with her family. She's
Yeah.
an outsider and now she's physically outside of the home. And the conversation that she has where she gets to see her daughter for the first time is at her daughter's sports game. And so there's other people around. So she has to kind of be very tempered with that in mind. But it's also just that thing of trying to hold her emotions back and not give them over to her daughter in that moment as well.
Mhm.
How did you want to play that as very much an undercurrent versus what you got to explore just before that was so external?
Right. Yeah. I think there's by that point in the film, I mean, we haven't had the full sort of moment of letting it all out yet, but she is starting to be almost humbled in a way. Like, even though there's a lot that's being done to her that is absolutely not right, there's also a part of her that's kind of acknowledging that she's been trying to live a lie in a way. And so I think when she comes to that scene, and seeing her daughter and seeing her husband, there's a bit of a like, yeah, I'm realizing I do, even though I've been completely screwed over here, there is also an aspect of there is a part of me that has been living a lie, and I'm gonna need to figure out how to stop doing that. So there's a bit of like almost a humbling that's happened to her in that process, and like you said, also really trying to be a good parent still throughout all, even going through all of this is just like I'm really going to try not to pass this on to my child and not to kind of repeat these patterns and things that have happened to me, and sort of let her just be a kid. But in the end, as we know, it's sort of like I'm not sure she was totally successful with that, but she's trying.
And this is definitely jumping straight back into spoilers, but I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about the scene that you and Micah have together where Caitlin's found out the truth about her identity and the way that their pasts intertwined, because I feel like you both play that so beautifully and it really speaks to exploring the gray area where it's not someone is fully the victim, someone is fully the perpetrator. It's, everybody can be both of those things and two things can be true at the same time.
Mm.
And, what felt important for you to convey in that moment because it's, I've been hurt, but I also understand you.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we were trying to convey. It was just like it's like Caitlin is really sort of dropped into this place of like realness now where she's like, okay, like there's no bad guys here. Like we're all very just we're two really wounded people and we're actually the same. Like, and just trying to connect with her and obviously she's still in this place of fear about her children, so that's another layer, where it's like, okay, she's feeling for this person and she wants to connect with her, but also her children are in danger because of her, so that's very complicated thing. So I think that's what she decides to do in that moment, is just like hope that this connection will break through and that will be the thing that kind of saves her and her children and her life ultimately, but also is her kind of letting go and admitting to her own guilt and her own, very, I mean, flawed sort of doesn't even cover it. It's like her own, just everything that she is, that is good and bad and everything in between. And so it's a beautifully complicated moment that I was so excited to play with Micah, because it just was a rare thing to get to see two women kind of connect in that way, especially in a film where you kind of expect that they're just pitted against each other, and ultimately, it is that there is this big fight at the end, and all of that comes to a head, and but underneath it there's this empathy for both of them, which was what I loved in the script, that felt just really kind of unique to this film, and what I loved so much about it.
And to your point, she hopes that the emotional connection will override everything, but it ends in a huge physical altercation between the two of them that gets
Yes.
increasingly heightened and dramatic. What went into the choreography of that? Because it, very much has to feel for the audience like either one could come out on top or take the other person down at any given moment. And it obviously goes back and forth and balances a lot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so funny because I just watched it, like the finished version, for the first time last night, like on the for at a cast and crew screening, and like I'm still just like like almost holding my breath from just watching that whole sequence. So it's amazing how, it's one thing to shoot it, but they've just, with everything, the editing and the music and just all of it put together, it's like, even though I filmed it and I was there, it's still just watching it on the big screen was really so incredibly intense and such a roller coaster. So yeah, I mean, when you're shooting those things, it's a lot of bits and pieces, and so you're kind of just, in a way, making it feel real, but it's also executing what needs to be executed. And then we put it all together, and it's like, oh wow, like that really works. But the amazing thing was the scene kind of preceding it and getting to go into it from that heightened emotional state. I always love that. I love being able to come at action from an emotional place, and like fighting for your life, like literally, like, screaming and crying. And as you see in the film, it's just like a bunch of snot. It's just like, it's messy and real. And that's my favorite part about it.
And in talking about how it ends and kind of that final moment between the two of them, where Caitlin goes over to Polly's body, and it's pretty gnarly what you see at that moment, but there's something really tender about the way that she kind of like lifts her head and kind of like tips it to the side.
Yeah.
There's all that blood that comes pouring out because it's so horrific but tender at the same moment.
Mhm.
What were you kind of feeling through Caitlin in that moment and kind of her reasoning behind that moment and that kind of touch?
Yeah, I think it was sort of stemming from, the sort of beginning of that whole sequence, the scene that we're talking about, where she sort of admits that she knows who she is, and all of that kind of comes out. Sorry, someone's knocking on my door. Um, and her sort of realizing who Polly is, and having kind of come to terms with all of that, and then this is not the outcome she wanted, at all. Like it's not like a triumphant. That's what I love about it. It's not like a triumphant, like, yeah, we got the bad guy. It's like a really sad. This is not the ending anyone wanted for these women, to have gone through what they went through. Sorry, I'm such a crier. I'm like already like crying just talking about the characters. But they both went through so much, and Polly obviously took a route that was, not the route anyone, should take it. But her reasons were very sad. It's an incredibly sad story. And so I think that's where Caitlin is coming from, and kind of holding her head, and all of that is like, she never wanted that outcome for Polly, or Rebecca, as is her real name. So it's a very traumatic and sad experience for Caitlin, and not at all triumphant in any way.
No, you're so right. And that's actually what I thought was so interesting about the lens that the film has taken as a whole and the way that it's told this story. So, congratulations on the movie. Thank you so much for talking about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Nice to talk to you.